Toronto is a city of 630 square kilometers, with 158 neighborhoods and more than 3 million people, each with their own story to tell. This is For the Love of TO.
Hi, everyone. I'm here with Amber Mack, our very first guest on the podcast, and I can't think of a better person to join us to kick things off and to talk about Toronto. Amber is a trailblazer in Canada's tech and media space. She's an entrepreneur, a best-selling author, keynote speaker, and one of Canada's go-to voices on digital innovation. She is also the host of The AI Effect. It's a weekly radio show and podcast. But most importantly, she is a proud Torontonian doing great things in our city. Amber, welcome. Thanks so much for being on the pod.
I am so excited. This is a great format, and I think it's always good to talk about Toronto. We need more of that.
We are here to chat about Toronto, important conversations with interesting people. Let's get into the city. But before I do that, I want to point out, like a lot of folks, you weren't born here in Toronto. You had an interesting journey. Where did you grow up?
So I was born in rural Prince Edward Island.
Rural.
Very rural PEI. And I went to journalism school in Halifax soon after I moved to the US for a few years. And then I found myself in a situation where I really wanted to come home to Canada. I had worked in the tech industry in San Francisco. And so a natural place for me to land was right here in Toronto. And so I've been here for, I guess, around 20 or so years at this point. And really, again, Toronto's kind of given me my entire career, and it's been such a great place to land, and also have a family here as well. I have a 16-year-old, and he was born right here in Toronto.
We'll talk about raising families in the city in a bit. I'm doing that as well. But it's curious. You're in the tech space. San Francisco has always been, I think, globally understood as a hub for that. What was the draw to leave San Francisco and come back to Canada and Toronto specifically?
Well, obviously way back in 1998, 1999, there was so much happening in the Bay Area in tech. It was really the beginning of the internet and the dot-com boom. So I was excited to be in a place where there was lots of opportunity. Second to that, I had a mountain of student loans and the dollar was really strong. And so it was a good opportunity for me to go somewhere and be part of the beginnings of really the internet. And eventually, obviously, coming back to Canada was the thing that I always wanted to do, but I wanted a chance to get some real experience in tech. And at the time, in the late 1990s, Canada just wasn't necessarily the place that you did that. I think that's changed a lot. People are moving back to Toronto who've lived in the US, and certainly you can make a career for yourself here. But I think in the late 1990s, San Francisco really was the place to be.
So you come back to Toronto. What does it look like from a tech sector perspective in the early 2000s?
Well, in the early 2000s, when I came back to Toronto, if you think about the tech sector at the time, it was still very early years. For the most part, it was really some of the bigger US-based tech companies that were operating here. So the Microsofts of the world, the Googles as well. And so there really wasn't a super strong startup scene, although it was kind of beginning during those years. And there were a number of people who were beginning companies and in those really early stages. But it did take a few years before we started to see the Shopifys of the world launch here. And so it took some time. So I think it was a slow beginning for the tech industry here in Toronto. Now it's a whole different world. I mean, you can start a world-class tech company right here in the city, and it doesn't matter where you live anymore. And so I think it's a great place to do that. But that was not the case 20 years ago.
So we have perhaps deliberately, perhaps organically, some combination of the two, but created a culture of innovation, of risk-taking, of entrepreneurial innovation. What was it about, the early 2000s that sort of gave rise to that here?
Well, I think in the early 2000s, I think a lot of people were still very excited about the beginnings of the dot-com industry, right? There were lots of possibilities that did exist. And so I think people saw potential in the industry to build something. And so I think a lot of people were drawn to major urban centers, including Toronto, to start new things here. And the tech community at the time was really small. It was a very tiny group of us. I actually hosted a show called Call for Help on G4 Tech TV, where we did an hour-long call-in tech show every single day, believe it or not, from right here in Toronto. And so, you would find maybe a few dozen tech founders in that community. So I think people love this idea of being part of something that was brand new. I certainly enjoyed that piece of it. I wasn't going to pursue the path of maybe my parents and my grandparents, a whole new industry, and we could kind of pave the way. And I think Toronto was just the place that made the most sense for a lot of people to be. But I'd still say that I think we're still a little bit risk averse. That may be why we're, again, when it comes to things like artificial intelligence, we're kind of slow in terms of commercializing it at the rate that we're seeing in the US.
So I want to talk a little bit about that. Toronto, as I understand it, is really the cradle of AI. Certainly a lot of research that comes out of the universities here. But it does seem like we haven't necessarily been able to commercialize that, to bring it to market. People might leave Toronto after coming up with a great idea and go and build it somewhere else. Why do you think that is the case?
Well, you're exactly right. I mean, historically, if you think about what's taken place here in Canada when it comes to artificial intelligence, we have some of the godfathers of AI, the Jeffrey Hintons of the world. There's so much that's been happening at the University of Toronto for decades now on the AI front. So we're really good at the research component of artificial intelligence, but like you said, not so great at the commercialization and a little bit slow when it comes to AI adoption into our businesses. I think one of the reasons, again, in terms of why we are at this place where we're maybe a little bit slower than some other parts of the world, I think just culturally, that is true of here in Toronto, but across the country, I don't think that we take risks perhaps as much as are taken in other places. Certainly my experience, just to contrast what I see here in Toronto, is in San Francisco, had people who were kind of all in to taking whatever money they had to jump into these businesses, start these businesses, and kind of risk everything. I think here in Toronto, you find people that I think they're a little slower to actually take some of those really big risks. At the same time, I feel like that maybe is changing, or more importantly, in light of what's taken place with our relationship with the U.S., it has to change. And so maybe the pressure of the time that we're in this moment is actually encouraging people to take more risks in tech and actually build homegrown tech right here in Toronto.
Circumstances around the world and south of the border might be forcing us off the fence. It's no longer viable if we're competing, around the world internationally to hedge on this sort of stuff. We have to lead on it.
Yeah, I think that's exactly true. And I think what you're seeing is sort of this momentum and maybe even kind of an awakening, an awareness that, oh, wow, people not realizing that, hey, we've outsourced every part of our lives and our businesses to these big US tech companies. Maybe it's time to actually take back some of that control and build technology right here on our own soil, build companies that are hosted in servers that are right here at home. And so I think we've been complacent and kind of comfortable with not being leaders in tech. But certainly at this moment in time, based on what's happening with geopolitics and beyond, we are in a moment. And I think Toronto is so well positioned around the world to really seize this moment and be that world-class tech cities that, hey, young people, like when I was young and moved to San Francisco, hopefully they come here from all across the world.
So when you think about how you build it and what would attract people to a city from the tech space, AI, why are some cities more attractive than others to come and put all your chips in the middle of the table, so to speak, to make that bet on a city, betting on yourself, but building it here? Why would you come to Toronto versus somewhere else? What competitive advantage do we have as a city, and maybe what could we do better?
Well, I think we have a huge competitive advantage right here in Toronto, and I think that's due to the fact that we are, of course, the biggest city in Canada, and that means, it is a city that, is relatively safe for the most part for people to come to. We're in a country where women's reproductive rights are respected. We are in a place where we are a diverse city that I think is really an advocate for things like inclusion. And so everybody has always been welcome here in the city. And I think all of those things are so appealing at a time where, yes, there's a lot of chatter about how people are moving to the US. But I will tell you from my female friends who work in the tech industry, who have started companies over the years, they're not moving south of the border because they value some of the things that I've just shared with you. And so they want to be right here at home. So I think that Toronto could do an even better job of promoting ourselves as this really inclusive, vibrant, safe city for people to be in, not just to start companies, but also to raise families as well.
It strikes me that sometimes navigating government can be very difficult. You look at the different regulations that the federal government has brought in on the tech sector, some successful, perhaps others less so. What do you think the role of government, whether we're talking feds, province, city, or everybody all together, is in incubating, cultivating investment in the tech sector, growing those jobs, creating pathways to entrepreneurialism and innovation? How do we,
Sure.
as government, help support the founders, help support the people who are building AI of the future?
Well, I think especially when it comes to artificial intelligence, this is a path that we have to be careful in terms of ensuring that there is regulation around artificial intelligence, things like guardrails that would come from a federal level, of course. But I also think that we have to have an environment both in the city and across the country that is really conducive to starting businesses, right? And I think for the most part, we do. I do sometimes kind of question this narrative of like, oh, government has to help us more and more when it comes to the tech ecosystem. I can tell you with certainty when I lived in San Francisco in the late 1990s, I never heard anyone ever talk about government to the extent we do here in Canada. They just kind of went out and did it, whatever they had to risk. And so I think that going back to my initial point, there's an element of sort of being bigger risk takers. I think that's really important, and living in cities and places that are friendly to, of course, these different tech businesses that are starting here, and not get in our own way, right? Because it's certainly true that too much regulation can turn people away. But like a guest I interviewed recently had said, the famous quote that when it comes to innovation, regulation is actually the mother of innovation. When we know what the guardrails are, and we know what the boundaries are to innovate, we tend to actually do more and do better. And I think one of the issues we have in Canada right now is that nobody knows when it comes to AI, what are the regulations? What are we allowed to do? Nothing's happened on that front. There's no leadership or guidance. That could be another reason we don't see these ambitious young people starting companies here, because they don't see the potential that they could have in this country because nobody's really laid it out for them.
That's such a good point. I used to work in local government here. I'm an urban planner by training. I was in the chief planner's office at the city of Toronto. So that was my first exposure to big bureaucracy. I remember a few years ago, the proposal from Sidewalk Labs, which was affiliated with Google, a new sort of waterfront community where they wanted to invest a lot of money and build new technology and leverage AI and really stand up and pilot something that could be built here in Toronto, but perhaps exported around the world. Now, as you said, there were a lot of concerns. I remember from, community people and folks across the city and within the bureaucracy. How do we regulate that? How do we put the guardrails in place around privacy and data and things like that? And it impressed upon me at the time, government is very good at doing the same thing over and over. That's why you have a bureaucracy. That's why you have regulation. You put that stuff in place to repeat. But it's not very good about thinking about new things, considering new things and what that looks like. And so the quickest answer in a risk-averse culture is always no. But that's not necessarily what drives us to embrace new things that might actually really unlock our potential on a go-forward basis. So how do governments plan for things that are difficult to forecast or predict and embrace the type of change that we need to see when bureaucracy is not necessarily set up to accept innovation like that?
Yeah, and I think Sidewalk Labs is a really interesting use case scenario, is because I would argue that if Sidewalk Labs came into Toronto at this moment in time, we would potentially embrace it with open arms, right? Again, it's a different time, and we need to do things like this. So I think when it comes to government, I think you're exactly right. We have to stop saying no. We have to stop putting barriers in front of us. And more importantly, accept that, hey, you're not going to be able to please everyone, right? And when it comes to technology, especially, like, I'm the one of the biggest advocates when it comes to things like protecting people's privacy, having guardrails around AI. But at the same time, I'm not one to say, no, we shouldn't have things like sidewalk labs here. I think it could have actually been game changing for the city in so many different ways. And we could have figured out how to actually innovate and protect privacy at the same time, right? And we didn't take the time to do that. So that was an example, I think, of a huge missed opportunity. And I suspect there are things happening like that all the time.
Well, that's exactly right. Just because it's hard and we haven't done it before doesn't mean we ought not to try and
Exactly.
figure it out. And I think it's incumbent on folks in leadership positions, whether that is, leaders of industry or government, politics, whatever. All the easy stuff is done already. So the challenges in front of us right now are very difficult and complicated, but we need to embrace that complexity and figure it out.
Yeah, I mean, I see this every single week. I'm speaking about AI to people here in Toronto and across the country, across different industries, and I hear the same thing over and over again. They want to start adopting AI. They want to start integrating AI into their businesses to be more productive, to achieve their long-term goals. But they're kind of frozen in time and afraid to start using it or integrating it because they don't know what to do or where to start. I mean, this is sort of that common thing that we see all the time, where people are totally paralyzed when we have new technologies in our lives and they're slow to be able to integrate and adapt to them. And I think we see this in government too over the years. If we take an example, again, this is not municipal but federal, but think about online safety for young people. We know this is a huge issue with these tech companies not protecting young people in the way that they should. And yet for years and years, we've done pretty much nothing. I mean, this is shocking to me. As someone in 2018 wrote a book about online safety for kids, we've known for a long time it's an issue, and we do nothing. We let these big tech companies come in, do whatever they want, and yet we have the talent right here at home, right here in Toronto, to be able to build better, build bigger, do so with our values that we have here in Canada. But again, we're very resistant at times.
So there's so much potential for tech and AI to be a driver of innovation, a driver of prosperity, job creation, our economy, and really leaders in a global context. And as we discussed, we're well positioned to do that. On the city, we're facing lots of issues when it comes to, safety, traffic management, affordability, housing. The list is long and the challenges are steep. Where do you see AI driving solutions that could be rolled out in local government or other governments to address these big problems that cities are facing?
Yeah, I mean, I think first and foremost, efficiencies, right? Like when we think about municipal governments, sometimes the process, as someone who lives here and pays taxes, is that I'm met with inefficiency after inefficiency after inefficiency, right? Like, is there an opportunity for things like agents or chatbots to smooth out the process when I'm doing everything from paying a tax bill to applying for a permit to do renovations on my house? I mean, we could see more of those efficiencies with artificial intelligence. One of the things that I think is very true about AI is how can governments at any level tell people to start adopting AI when they themselves aren't even integrating it into what they do, right? So at a municipal level, there's opportunities, I'm sure, at every corner to be able to integrate AI into what you're offering to the residents of the city. And yet we've been really slow on that front as well. So I think we can start some of these maybe pilot projects. We could do more on this front. And it could be things like traffic safety. There's lots of examples of AI being used when it comes to traffic safety, any type of software interaction with any residents through permitting process. There's lots of places that AI can play a really important role.
There are jurisdictions, even here in Canada, the city of Edmonton, my understanding is now using AI to help streamline basic things like building permit approvals and the efficiency that you can drive from that. And again, efficiency is really just about doing more with less, leveraging those precious, valuable taxpayer dollars and making sure that they can go further. There's also the added benefit of we could be working with local Canadian contractors or suppliers to stand up these technologies and be that first big breakthrough client for a startup here in Toronto. And yet I find time and time again, I hear from founders or entrepreneurs, folks who are building things here in this city, and they're exporting them around the world, but they're not able to sell it into the market here in Toronto.
Yeah, and I think that unfortunately is the story over and over again, right? We tend to oftentimes, I see that in the city and I see that with tech companies where they get a lot of attention and recognition around the world before they're actually recognized right here at home. That is just an insane way to help to support and nurture the growth of a really vibrant tech ecosystem here in the city. So I think we have to do a better job. And you're starting to see some of these communities, at least in tech, kind of pull together. You're starting to see this made in Canada tech enthusiasm that I think we're seeing here in Toronto and across the country. So I think this moment in time, there's been a shift. So I could absolutely talk about what's taken place over the past few years in terms of this kind of complacency and this slowness that we've seen. But I think we have a window of opportunity over the next few months right here in Canada and the next couple of years that we have to seize this opportunity, especially right here in Toronto.
What do you think the biggest challenges facing Toronto are writ large right now? If we want to attract international capital, top talent, the brightest, smartest people from around the world. And I think we talked about there's a lot of great foundational things that exist here in the Canadian economy and in the most diverse city in the world here in Toronto. There's a lot of good stuff.
Yeah.
But you mentioned you have a 16-year-old at home raising a family here in Toronto. You're an entrepreneur. Some of those things are challenging and difficult. What do you think the biggest challenges facing Toronto are right now for you?
Well, I think housing, of course, is a huge challenge. I don't need to tell you that. This is a world that you understand better than I do. But I think about him, if he wants to stay here and maybe he wants to start his own business in the years to come after he finishes university. I think safety. I think a lot of people, and this is purely anecdotal, but people that I'm talking to, I think they feel less safe in this city, particularly when it comes to riding the TTC. My son's been riding the TTC since he was a little kid. Now it's at the point where even he feels a little bit uncomfortable because there's never a normal ride. And so there's always something happening. That's not a great way for young people to grow up. So these are things I think that are totally solvable. But I think if we can do more on housing and we have a city that is safer for people, and we also, I think, do a better job of branding Toronto as this amazing tech hub, because I would argue we've done a great job in sports to brand this city as a place where, hey, we have, world-class sports teams. We haven't done a great job, I don't think, on the tech front to really brand this city as a city that is tech first and tech forward. That's not what I think of, at least when I think about Toronto, but I think the potential is there, right?
I want to come back to the tech branding, but just on those problems that you were sort of identifying, the challenges, sometimes they feel like we can't solve them. Or certainly when we look at our track record, over the 10, 15 years, however far back, it's often the same challenges. Housing has always been expensive in Toronto, although, you're working harder and you're falling further behind today. Congestion has always been bad in the big city. I think transit is less reliable today than it has historically been, but and safety, people have those concerns, real or perceived. What do you think we can do to actually solve them? And I don't mean like the specifics of like we're going to hire this amount of police officers or we're going to do a state of good repair of overhaul online too. So like those are the practical things. But why do some of these big challenges facing, cities like Toronto seem intractable?
Well, I think there's a lot of people who probably feel like I do, that it's hard to see progress that's taken place in the city. Like if you ask me as someone who's lived here for 2 decades, like how have you seen the city progress over time? I can tell you, because I travel across this country, that I can go to the Halifax waterfront and say, oh my God, they've revitalized the waterfront.
It's spectacular.
It's spectacular. I can say the same thing about St. John, New Brunswick. They're in the middle of doing that, and it's absolutely beautiful. My home province of Prince Edward Island, where I was born, Charlottetown, is a city that, I don't even recognize from my youth. It's totally changed. In 20 years in Toronto, I haven't seen many changes. And if anything, it's kind of been for the worse. So if you ask me the question of what can be done, I don't know, but hopefully something, because it's not as transparent to me that things are improving. And I'm not saying they're on the decline to the point where people aren't going to come here anymore, but I do think it is unfortunate that we are sort of in this kind of like stalemate, right? Like it does feel like we just don't know who we are and where we want to go. And the vision is lacking for the future of this city. And that's frustrating as a resident, as someone who's lived here. When I look around, I think nothing has changed. Nothing's gotten, so bad that I won't live here anymore. But I certainly can't point to the thing where I feel like, wow, the city is working for me.
Okay, so when was peak Toronto for you? When were we our best? And I have an answer to that, but I'm curious yours.
Well, that's a good question. So I don't want to go back too far, but I'm going to say when I moved here from San Francisco, sort of 2005, one of the things that I noticed right away is like how safe I felt here. Like I'd walk around by myself as a woman at nighttime, and I never worried about anything. I would take the TTC. I never had any concerns. I decided to start a family here. I bought my own home here as a single woman, a small townhouse, but it was still a home. And so around 2005, I felt it to be sort of this incredible city that I couldn't wait to start my life and my business here. But I felt that decline over the past few years, unfortunately. And again, I don't want to say decline like it's been so horrible, but listen, if you travel to other places, you notice change. And I don't see that here.
Yeah, and it's often rinse and repeat, the condos that have gone up, but housing is not more affordable. The same sort of Toronto vernacular architecture, not necessarily particularly iconic. There are some examples, but it's been kind of rinse and repeat. The reason I ask is you were talking about all these other Canadian examples of cities, and certainly if we go internationally, you can find others. But does Toronto need to sort of get its mojo back, get its swag back? Like you go to 2019, for me, Raptors win the championship. NBA is massive in North America. All eyes are on the city. Everyone's really excited about it. It was pre-pandemic. It felt like, we were kind of on top. And, it sort of feels like we moved away from that over the past number of years. You talk about how do we brand the tech sector? How do we brand ourselves as a global destination for capital and talent and innovation and people who want to build it here? What does that look like? How do we get our swag back as a city? And, how does the tech sector and AI be foundational to that?
It's funny you say that because I think it was 2018 or 2019. I was doing an interview on stage for Shopify with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, and he said we need to get our swagger back. He got in so much trouble for that comment at the time because people found it really bold and kind of offensive. Like, no, it's a great place to be. So I certainly remember that as being kind of a tipping point year in many ways.
I hope I didn't just ruin the podcast.
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. The only reason I say that is I think that first of all, I think on the tech front, Collision is probably a great example of what not to do in the future, right? So we had Collision here for a few years. No disrespect to the teams there. They're great people.
Sure.
What did they do? For 3 years, they flew in all of these American journalists and reporters to host sessions on stages with mostly American audiences with a few Canadians here and there in Toronto. And that was trying to become kind of Toronto's, tech community. That is absurd. We did with Collision what we're kind of doing with social media networks, like outsourcing all of the opportunity to these big American companies. So if you ask me what should we do in the future, not that. We should actually support homegrown tech festivals that are centered around this idea of we want to promote and support Canadian tech companies and founders that are right here in Toronto, and start to really support these homegrown innovations in whatever way it takes, however that is possible. But we haven't done that. We've sort of tried to be something else. And I think we have to figure out what is Toronto? Like, what are we unique in? And I think the uniqueness actually goes back to artificial intelligence. Again, if you look at the godfathers of AI and look at how many of them have come through Toronto or are still based here in Toronto, that's pretty significant. So we could be the world's AI city. Like, has anyone said that out loud? But we could be. But we would have to kind of put some planning and time and energy and money behind that. But I haven't seen anyone have sort of the will and the vision to do just that.
Sometimes I feel like Toronto could do a little bit more to celebrate our success.
Yes.
And celebrate our success because there's a lot to celebrate and there's a lot to be proud of. But there's this sort of trepidation and timidness and almost, I guess it probably comes from a place of being humble, but there's a lot of other cities and jurisdictions that are out there beating that drum as massive ambassadors and champions for the people and the talent and the businesses and all the great things that are coming out of the city. And I'm just not sure if we've done enough to celebrate our success versus, you draw the example of Collision, sort of trying to import it for a week with some flashy signs and promotional material. But then, tens of millions of dollars are spent, a week goes by, and all of that rolls out the door afterwards.
Yeah, and it's not supporting the ecosystem. I mean, it's a great fun event to go to, but it's not really supporting the ecosystem that is here in a significant way. So again, I say all of this because I don't want to sound negative, because actually I'm very optimistic about the future. Because again, I want to go back to this moment in time. Now is the time to do this. We have the outside pressure on this city. We have the lens on this country of like, okay, what is Canada going to do next? How are we going to build right now? And I think Toronto has an opportunity to kind of define itself over the coming years by doing things differently, by supporting these different communities that we've talked about, the tech community and beyond, and making sure this city is more livable at all levels for the people who've invested and been here for a long time as well. But we need that vision. And I don't personally, as someone who's lived here for a while, see that vision. I couldn't tell you what Toronto is going to be in the future, because I don't really know, because I don't hear anyone talking about it. Like, they're in the weeds of the day-to-day stuff, and I get that. That's part of your job. But I actually also crave and am really hungry for that vision of what this city is going to become.
Well, we all have this nostalgia of Toronto and different stories getting here and what that looks like. And you look back on that with maybe there's some nostalgia, fondness, warm memories. And then you look at where we're at today, and sometimes that's met with frustration. Sometimes that's met with challenges. But I think, and I hear it in you, there is this belief and this optimism that it ought to be better and that it can be better. And I think there's a lot of Torontonians in the tech space and others that are united in that desire to really deliver on a vision that, make sure that we are still a family, a city where you want to raise a family, where you want to build a business, where you can walk around in the evening and you're not looking over your shoulder. It's a friendly city, it's a welcoming city, and it's a city that embraces change. And so, collectively, we all have to come together to realize that. But there's no doubt that's going to be difficult to do.
It's going to be difficult to do, but I would also say we have to accept that maybe it is good enough right now, but who wants to live with good enough, right? Like, it's okay to be ambitious, right? And that's another thing I think we have to wrap our heads around, that, people may be okay with how it works at this time, but there's nothing wrong with being more ambitious.
We should not shoot for third and then be satisfied with coming in fourth.
No.
All the ingredients here are to, it gets cliche to say, oh, world-class city, top 5 city, but Toronto should be up there with all the cities that people typically rattle off when it comes to quality of life, when it comes to, a place to start a business, to raise a family, those things that we want to sort of realize for people who are calling this city home. Can I ask you a couple Toronto questions?
Let's do it.
Okay. So you've been here. Have you moved around a bunch in Toronto in your time?
I have. I have lived in the West End. I've lived in the East End. I now live in Midtown. So I've done the rounds.
Okay, so let me ask you that East-West. I'm a believe in the East guy. I'm out at Beaches, East York, but are you partial to the East End or the West End?
Oh, 100% East End.
Okay. All right. No, that's good. You got a favorite restaurant that you like to go out to?
Yeah, so I just moved to Midtown, and there's a tiny little local restaurant called Wild Chicory, which is on Mount Pleasant, and it's a small spot, but the food is phenomenal.
And where Mount Pleasant are we? Out to Eglinton?
We are just a little bit north of Davisville. That's where the restaurant is.
Okay.
Yeah, on the east side of Mount Pleasant.
I feel like you've been there recently because that was very...
I'm good directionally.
Okay, very good. Toronto's a festival city. We're summertime right now. There's lots of stuff going on. Do you like to go out? Get outside, go to the parks, do that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when I think about festivals, I think for the most part, the film festival in the fall, I think that's such a special time, the beginning of the school year and so much more. So the film festival is probably one that I've participated the most in, and it's one of my favorite. But there's lots of little local festivals that are great as well.
Question for everybody, always comes up. We do it in different ways, but getting around Toronto, Sometimes it feels like it's never been more difficult than it is right now. But what's your preferred mode of transportation? How do you get around the city of Toronto?
So I'm really happy to live in Midtown because I am very close to the subway. And this has been life-changing for me and my family, being close to the subway, because we lived in the East End, which actually was pretty easy to get around for a while until everything kind of fell apart with the removal of the off-ramp of the DVP and whatnot. But, or I should say Gardner, I guess. But I think that being near the subway, if you're in the city near the subway, that is such a luxury. So the TTC would be my first way to want to get around the city for sure.
Anecdotally, I lived down in Boston, Massachusetts for a few years. And fun fact, it has North America's oldest subway system. You might assume it's New York or something, but it's Green Line in Boston. And when I was trying to find an apartment, because I had the Toronto mentality, I was so focused on being close to the subway. But that's not a deciding factor there. It's, spaghetti thrown on the wall. That's what the subway looks like. So, yeah, it's such a Toronto thing to be like, I need to be on the subway, but that's because we haven't built enough subways.
We haven't built enough subways. So I'd say, like I said, my favorite part of the city is definitely the East End, but it's much more accessible living in Midtown right now. So I'm happy where I am.
Very good. We're going to wrap there. Amber, thanks so much for joining us here. This has been a ton of fun. For listeners, you can check out Amber on most of the social media platforms. She's at Amber Mac, and be sure to subscribe to her podcast. Thanks again for tuning in, and we will catch you next time.
This is For the Love of TO.